Hello everyone. Good evening. Today's webinar topic is the impact of geopolitical events on commodity markets. So for this, we have with us Dr. Shunmugam. He is a partner consultant at MCQ, overseeing market infrastructure institutions with a PhD in agricultural economics from the Indian Agricultural Research Institute. He has played pivotal roles in shaping India's commodity and derivative markets, including leadership positions at MCX and MSCI. His expertise lies in integrating economic theory with practical market applications, focusing on research, regulatory frameworks, and policy advocacy to enhance the robustness of India's financial infrastructure. Now, a glimpse about NISM. NISM is a public trust established in 2006 by Securities and Exchange Board of India, that is SEBI, the regulator of securities markets in India. The institute carries out a wide range of capacity building activities at various levels aimed at enhancing the quality standards in securities markets. Before beginning this session, I would like to request all the participants to note some important points. First, questions will be taken at the end during Q&A segment. Second, all participants will receive participation certificate within 3 to 4 days. And third, the recording of this session will be available on NISM's YouTube channel. Now I request Sir to begin with the session.
Thanks to Nisha for this introduction, actually, and apologies to everyone for keeping you waiting for so long a time. Got into a meeting and then, coming on the road here, the difficulties on the Mumbai road. So I estimated around 4:30, but I ended up at around 4:35. But anyway, having said that, I'm not going to stop at cutting down the knowledge delivery that you are eager to hear about it. Actually, in today's session you're going to hear about the you're going to hear about the commodity markets, and then what are these commodity markets, and how geopolitical events are impacting the commodity markets, actually, right? So commodity markets, right, are so we are attending this class, we are attending this class because our this webinar basically because we have our laptop which is with us, actually, and we are attending this webinar because we have electricity which is given to us, actually, and that laptop is made out of various metals, and electricity is being produced from coal, and then it is being transmitted through an aluminum or a copper wire, and then all these commodities help you to attend this. So similarly, in each and every function or activity that we take in our life, commodity markets are the bloodstream. And having said that, of not only the individual lives, it is also the bloodstream of the global economic activity, right? And so commodity markets are the basis of the economic activities that happens in the world, actually. So be it oil, be it metals, actually, so they fuel the nations, and then metals help you build up automotives and buses, and what else and whatnot, and you have the industries, and you have the infrastructure which has created using many commodities, actually. So if you don't have commodities, you can't create all of them, actually. And this market is actually depending upon one, there is a smooth flow of the commodities based on what is the demand and supply, and this flow happens based on some expected parameters, actually, right? So like, say for example, if you are shipping copper from China to India, so not expected to take more than a week or 10 days to land over in some of the ports on the eastern side. Maybe another 5 days if you are expecting it in a port on the western side, actually. So this number is pretty well calculated, pretty well included in the planning process and things like that, actually. So that is something which is very critical for you to understand. This is where the risk starts, actually, right? And the price discovery happens globally. I mean, not only except for some of the agriculture commodities where there are some import and export restrictions, our prices are determined globally and guided by the global fundamentals, which is the global supply and demand for many of the commodities and things like that, actually, right? And any shift in any one of the region can have ripple effect across all the continents, actually. Like, say, for example, the ban or the sanctions on Iran actually had an impact on crude oil prices. And crude oil prices, if we talk about crude oil prices, the one or two key crude oil prices that we follow in the energy markets is your Brent and WTI crude oil. Both the crude oil, though WTI hasn't got anything to do with the quality of Iran, the oil which is being supplied by Iran, but you still will have some sort of a relationship or reaction coming in from the WTI crude, which is being traded in the US markets, actually, right? So something happens in Iran, it just gets amplified across the globe, actually, right? And so one region, whatever the impact that happens, it will have a ripple effect across the continents, actually. So for India as well, commodity price swings, will affect the inflation, and it sometimes could lead to current deficits. Actually, for example, if I can give you something like this is not a geopolitical, but it's important event that happened in our lives, which is COVID, right? When COVID happened, we all got locked up at our homes, actually. But at the end of the day, what happened? We didn't take out our cars. We didn't move out of our homes at all, actually. And so there was a very less oil demand. And because there was a very less oil demand, the oil imports have gone down significantly. And since oil imports have gone down significantly, and we had kept up our exports pretty constantly, we saw that our trade deficit becoming positive. It was not a trade deficit; it was a trade surplus, which happened in almost like 2 quarters during 2020 when the COVID was there, actually. So the commodity price swings can affect inflation. This is not a price swing. This is basically a demand swing which had affected. But at times when the commodity price swings, are pretty much wilder, it can impact our inflationary levels, the price levels, and the deficit levels, both at the trade and the fiscal deficit, actually. So both would be impacted. So here is where we begin our journey, how the politics shapes these prices, actually. So when we talk about politics, actually, so we know we have 2 or 3 or 4 parties or many parties in India, but end of the day, these parties fight with each other, they determine national policies and things like that. That's not geopolitical. So the word geopolitical itself says that, right? Geography and politics, actually. So geography means different nations, how they interact with each other, and how they do politics with each other. So that is the key thing, which is something which you need to understand. So here is what is some pointers that I just wanted to bring it to your attention. Actually, every price which is discovered in a market begins with a simple equation as to what the supply of the commodity is and what is the level of demand which is likely to be in the global economy, actually. So that's a simple equation, and there are so many assumptions which goes behind what you determine as a supply and what you determine as a demand, number one, and number two. And apart from that, based on what is the supply and what is the demand, what is the likely price? So what do you think as a likely price which should provide for that commodity given a supply and demand may be differing from one individual to another individual, and the market has millions of individuals which is trading in that particular commodity. So the price begins with the simple equation and then starts dispersing in the markets depending upon how individuals price these supply and demand fundamentals, actually, right? And like if in case some of the geographies do have very strong economic growth, and they do have a very strong demand, or they constitute a larger portion of the demand, global demand, actually. So when they are in a growth mode, obviously that is leading to a higher demand, and higher demand would lead to higher higher prices as well, unless in other ways these supplies are being augmented to meet the demand, actually. And then on the negative side, weather, any climate change, can abruptly change the metal supplies. It can even change the energy supplies. It can even change the agriculture commodity supplies actually. So mainly the agriculture commodity, to some extent metal, and the energy supplies, to the extent that weather impacts the production and transportation of these energy and metal commodities actually. So the weather, the output cuts, like OPEC, Organization of Petroleum Exporting and producing and exporting countries actually. So they have their own policy of determining what the output that they would have in the next 1 quarter or the 2 quarters or something like that. And they, in a way, they control the commodity supplies. By controlling commodity supplies, they control the commodity prices actually. And strikes are pretty often, especially when you talk about some of the countries which are in South America actually, especially Chile, Argentina, and these countries do have, frequent strikes, especially because these countries have metals such as copper and, other metals actually. And whenever there is a mine strike, obviously it'll disturb the copper supplies, and that, mine strike would lead to lower copper production and lower supply in the market, and hence the prices of copper goes up actually. So there are various other factors which determine what is the supply, what is the demand, and hence what should be the price of the market actually. So, and then it's not that you are determining today's prices actually. In a futures market, you are also determining futures prices actually, and that determination comes because you start building up expectations into, if today's price is this and tomorrow's price should be that, right? And and to help you do that, what is the level of production. You can estimate what is the level of production which is likely to be in futures, and you also know what is the inventory that can be carried over actually. Any reduction in inventories that happen, could lead to a very high fluctuation in the prices of some of the commodities actually, and hence, I mean, inventories are something which needs to be watched from a price determination perspective actually. So the balance between the supply and the demand is very delicate, and hence this is where the geopolitics is very important actually. So very important from the perspective of, to understand geopolitics and how it influences commodity prices, and to have our stake or our say on what the likely commodity prices are actually, right? So let's look into some of the geopolitical events actually. So geopolitical, so that's basically, I would divide that into a political tilt actually, where it's something beyond the numbers, and political forces often tilt the balance of the markets actually. So which could be something in terms of wars actually. Say for example, we ourselves have seen Ukraine Russia war. We ourselves have seen the Gaza, the war in Gaza against the Hamas, which is being hosted by Israel. Actually, we ourselves have seen some of the blockades which had happened in, say, for example, Red Sea, which the Yemen, the Houthi rebels did that actually. And then we also have seen from our maybe seeing some sanctions, coming off and on, like the sanctions on Russia, the sanctions on Iran, and things like that, actually. So they also reshape the global fundamentals, and they also reshape the global trading routes. It's very important. Trading routes are very important because they determine how quickly you get the commodity, how cost effectively you get the commodity. So it just can change overnight. A sudden bombing in Red Sea could lead to ships, turning back and coming all the way out to the Atlantic, and then coming back via the Atlantic Sea and Cape of Good Hope, and then coming into to touch base with the Asia actually. So that is the kind of disruption that can happen because of one mischief which is being done by one player, which is there in the global geopolitics actually, right? And governments even may weaponize trade or close export tabs actually. Say for example, typically we've seen that, like, so it's not that Iran was, a rogue country, but Iran was a rogue country, but from the perspective of the West, and as a result, because they've been developing nuclear weapons, and I mean, and the West didn't believe that. The nuclear weapons should be with Iran, and so they wanted to do that with an economic sanctions, actually. So they weaponized trade, right, and to some extent, right. So the other case where they closed the export taps. A good example is China, right? As China started dominating, flexing its muscles in the international trade and also international investments. I mean, every other one got afraid about, what if China becomes uncontrollably larger, actually, right? And so one of the things which the US did was, we will close the taps in terms of what are the chips that you can access, actually. So the chips, in the sense, the chips that you need for computing purposes, especially not the normal computing, but the high-end computing, which is used for artificial intelligence and machine learning and things like that, actually. So that is closing tabs. That is to say that, you don't have access to higher technologies, and so you will be restricted until you hear what we say, actually. So they can even weaponize the trades, actually, right? And they were like, strategic flashpoints that could happen. One of the flashpoints is, the borders can become financial flashpoints where, like, it was a small chicken neck kind of a pass, and if they can pass it, then they can come straight away into touching base with the entire Asia, actually, which is your Red Sea, actually. And all of a sudden, because Houthis have started attacking any and every ship which is coming on that route, actually, I mean, the entire market became tizzy, actually. So all of a sudden, everything, including the cost of transportation, changed, actually. So that's very important, actually. So geopolitics is important in terms of us supplying and sentiment, right? So more than what actually happens on the ground, how much of copper is left on the ground, more important is how much of copper can one access in the world, is what people look at in terms of pricing copper, actually. So from that perspective, sentiment shift is something which changes from time to time, actually, right? Depending upon how much of physical supplies have been hit and things like that. Commodity is being produced, commodity is being warehoused, but it could not be shipped from the origin countries to the destination countries, actually. In for commodities, it is very important for us to actually understand that commodities are produced by typically some of the countries, and commodities are consumed across the world, actually. So from that perspective, what happens in few countries or what happens in the entire supply chain would have an impact across a number of countries, actually. And then, a small reduction in copper supplies, a small reduction in steel supplies, a small reduction in crude supplies. You must have seen in many of the cases, OPEC could have reduced the supply of oil by 0.25%, could have led to another 2% or 3% rise in prices, actually. It's basically the fear-driven rallies which can actually ignite a higher price increase as well, actually. So it's the sentiments which is very important, actually, and geopolitics, gets reflected onto the trading floors, and that's where the global risk matrices start hitting the red line of the risks which are there in the markets, actually. So having said that, geopolitics can change the world overnight, so that's very important for us to understand. And one of the event which we all have seen, we all have witnessed, is Russian invasion of Ukraine that had happened, actually. The sudden thing that got panicked is the oil markets. Oil shot up to $139 a barrel, which is like a slightly few dollars lesser than the highest the highest that was hit in 2008 financial crisis, actually. And the European gas prices, kind of exploded from about normal $5, $6, $8. It shipped to around $40 per $40 per MMBTU, actually. So that basically says that because the Russia was the largest supplier of gas in the EU, and the fear in the market that the EU may actually ban Russian gas supplies. Having said that, they didn't. I mean, they could not afford to ban the entire supplies, but to the extent that they could afford to, they actually avoided supplies up to the extent of 50% of the total, 50 or 60% of the total supplies that they were making prior to the invasion, actually. So still there is a Russian supplies that is going on, but that with the ban of the Russian supplies, Europe would have to look for some other sources of natural gas, and this is where the shale gas phenomenon, which happened in the US, came in handy for the the Europeans to actually bring in the shale gas into as a liquid natural gas into Europe and regasify that and then put it into their pipeline so that they can start using it actually. So to some extent, supply chains stumbled and Europe was not at all prepared because they don't have ports which can actually take in the LNG. They don't have ports which do not have plants which can actually regasify the liquid natural gas into the gas form of the natural gas so that that natural gas can be injected into the gas pipelines actually. So they all have to scramble around to put that pipeline and infrastructural facilities in their port so that they can avoid the Russian gas and they can bring in the US gas into their into their economy actually. And the other one is which we've seen and we are continuing to see is the Red Sea disruption. And Red Sea is typically about 12% or 13% of the total global trade supplies pass through the Red Sea actually. And most of what comes out of Europe and east coast of US, comes via the Red Sea, crosses the Suez Canal, comes via the Red Sea, and then reaches the Asia actually. So 13% of the global trade, which is roughly around $1 trillion of the global trade, is today at stake actually. And most of that is to the Asia, and some of that could be the eastern part of Africa actually. So all of that, what was supplied, which you see on the right side of the graph, which has to come through the blue line, has to follow the red line and look at the distance that they have to pass actually almost like 50 to 60% higher distance that they have to pass, and with the number of days increasing there is also an increase in the insurance costs actually. And even if you would want to take it through the Red Sea, because there is a risk of bombing, and you will have to bear the higher insurance costs even if you have to come through the Red Sea actually. So the commodity prices went up because of this, Red Sea disruption which happened actually, and Gaza conflict actually. Gaza conflict led to the major supply, Iran jumping into the conflict and saying we would support the Hamas and things like that, and hence as a result, everyone was afraid that what if Iran was completely, or the Iranian supplies were completely shut down of the markets, actually, right? So that was again something which would have reduced the oil supplies in the market, which would have increased the oil prices, actually. So all these joins together, right? It's not one which has happened in one particular period. Leave aside the Ukraine invasion, which happened in 2022, 2023, and 24, actually typically saw that these disruption flaring up again and again. So sorry, Red Sea disruption was in 24. So 24 and 25, is a combination of both Gaza conflict, the Red Sea attacks, the Ukraine invasion, and things like that, actually. So the commodities have been kept on the boil, actually. Okay. So it's not only the commodities, it is beyond commodities. It's the products, which is, very important actually, that are as pathways. How do we reach those commodities from the producing centers to the consumption centers? That's very important actually. One of the things which happen when you do have a very fragile supply chain, so if you look at the seaport of Ukraine. Ukraine has access to the Black Sea actually, and Russia also has access to the Black Sea, and Russian Navy typically had a blockade for all the ports which was actually originating from Ukraine. Anything and everything which is shipped by Ukraine can be targeted by Russian Navy, and hence it had led to a global food insecurity. Actually, what to talk about global food insecurity, but also you should talk about some of the materials that they continue to produce and send, right from steel, which was exported from Ukraine, to neon as a gas, which is used in the chip making industry. Actually, so that also raked in some fears in the market regarding supplies of neon. Over a period in time, industry had learned to live with some disruption which came from disruption in supplies from Ukraine. But there was also augmented production which came in from China and everything. So that kind of made up for the loss of neon from Ukraine-based steel plants. Actually, so every other commodity got disrupted actually, and we all know the Houthi attack had led to the rerouting of the shipping, adding 15 days to the transit time actually, right? So that's a pretty important thing that leads to the cost of transportation. And Suez Canal, right? I mean, anything which comes via Atlantic and then have to pass through, they have to pass through the Suez Canal, enter into the Red Sea, and then get into the Arabic Ocean, actually, right? So Suez Canal was completely disrupted, actually, and that disruption led to delays in metal exports, which EU has been pretty competitive in. And then some of the imports which is supposed to reach EU did not reach them actually. So Suez Canal, having said that, is an important transportation point for many of those Eastern European and the Western European countries. And that got disrupted not because Suez Canal was closed, but because the Red Sea route disruptions could not let any ship to pass through Red Sea and then get via the Suez Canal, actually, right? And Suez Canal also had its own disruption. That was basically because of a a very large container, ship which got struck up in one of the gates over in the canal, and as a result, it took some time for the Suez Canal authorities to clear. But I'm not here talking about that disruption, but here I'm talking about the disruption which is flowing in from the Red Sea disruption, actually. And because there is a sea-based disruption, and there is always a risk in terms of number of days that it takes to reach the place, and then also in terms of the route the ship takes, actually. The insurance premium for shipping the commodities went higher. Insurance premium for the ships, itself went higher. And when ship insurance becomes higher, obviously they're going to ask you for a higher fleet charges, actually. So that is another thing that we need to also keep in mind. It's not a very simple thing, but it has to be. And even sometimes, pipelines could be sabotaged, actually. And fertilizer prices, jumped up globally. One of the thing that I can tell you, fertilizer prices, where it had an impact was the Ukraine-Russia war. And Russia has been a biggest supplier of the nitrogenous fertilizers, thanks to the naphtha and crude oil that they have. And because of the typical ban on dollar transaction between Russia and other countries, actually, so nobody could import the Russian fertilizer which they were typically used to import in large numbers, actually. And to Russia, it was a value addition opportunity using crude oil and naphtha to produce the nitrogenous fertilizers. So fertilizer prices jumped globally. And so that made even the officials in the Ministry of Finance to get into a hurdle to understand, hey, what is going on? Are our fertilizer costs going to go up? And as a result, the cost of production of various agriculture commodities in India is going to go up. Actually, should we, which is the best price to track? Actually, literally, they got into a hurdle to determine what India's response would be in terms of, this disruption in supply chains, actually, right? While the war zones go dark, safe zones light up with fear, actually, right? War slows the production, factories stall because they are afraid of the demand which will be coming in from the economies. The mobility shrinks, especially in places where there is mobility is challenged, actually. Jet fuel demand falls because flights could not fly through through those countries and things like that, are the other way also the flight fuel demand may go up because there is a no-fly zone that has been declared by the countries, such as what happened in the case of India and Pakistan conflict, actually, which recently actually saw industrial slowdown or demand for commodities going down, and then everybody goes towards the safety. So while one of the demand for many of the commodities are coming down, on the other hand, demand for one another commodity was going up, basically because many of the investors are running towards safety, which is where they want to invest in gold, whose prices they always trust, actually, right? So it's not about the need, but also the trust, which is where the investors seek the emotional security in investing in that particular commodity, especially gold and silver, which can also impact, actually, right? And the panic buying, right? Say, for example, yesterday I was like listening to one of the news items, actually, wherein the entire Japanese press was, or the population was angry against the government over there in Japan. You know what? The reason was very nimble, that the government would not control the prices of rice, actually, because the sticky rice that Japan produces cannot be imported from anywhere other than maybe some parts of China and Japan, actually, right? And Japanese are very particular about the rice that they consume. It has to be produced in Japan. It has to be consumed by them. Only then it could be consumed by them. So what happened? The government saw the prices going up, and government opened up its trade route, and then said that China and Korea can also export to Japan, but typically they were showing many of those Korean and Japanese rices. I mean, and then they were showing the racks in which Japanese rices were sold. Actually, the Japanese rice rack was completely sold out, but the Korean and Chinese rice racks were still remaining there. Actually, that basically means they don't like, and so that led to a panic buying. Panic buying leads to a higher prices, and it's a self-fueling theory, right? You don't need to have actual demand to fuel the prices. You need to have panic based demand to fuel the fear, actually. And that could also one of the reasons that could happen when people see there is a war, and war could disrupt supply of commodities and things like that. For example, one of the rumors which was circulating in the WhatsApp university, when the crude oil prices were going the India and Pakistan were getting tense about on the border, and there were some attacks that had happened around the 8th or 9th of May. I mean, few of the petrol pumps in Mumbai, Thane were out of petrol, actually, not because that people wanted it, but because that people wanted to keep their petrol tanks filled up, and so everyone rushed to the petrol pump and filled it up. But they only have a regular supply of oil, petrol through the trucks, and those trucks, those supplies couldn't match what the demand was coming up. So typically, these are reasons why we should be very afraid about, and demand side becomes a little more defensive, and they may be defensive in terms of slowing down consumption. They may be defensive in terms of increasing consumption because of panic buying, because of flight to safety, actually, right? So these are things which we need to understand, actually, right? And let's come to the Russia, right? And Russia is a bigger supplier or bigger producer of crude oil, and that crude oil is being transported through the pipelines into the ports, and from those ports, actually, it's being exported and sent to the refineries, and the refineries actually refine and send the petrol or diesel to the petrol pumps, and then plastics and other things to the other industries, from where the entire crude derivative products, not the futures or options, but the crude derived products, actually, such as the plastics and methane and everything, gets sold through the through the supply chain, actually. So the point is, look at the distance between where the Russian Arctic based the crude oil wells are there, and then how much distance the crude oils flow through the pipelines and then reach to the port to be shipped from the Black Sea out into the Arabic Ocean into India and China. So that's a long supply chain actually. So the prices that is discovered on the prices that are discovered on the market platform actually are discovered based on a trust that the supply chain will continue to remain stable actually, and the wars such as the Ukraine Russia war and the the Gaza and Israel war actually pretty much led to the trust that is being broken. As a result, market always feared supplies being hit upon actually. So that's another thing which we need to be on. And to beat that, obviously, there are producers who sit on with the reserves, but they do have their own capacity, how much reserves they can hold. And consumers also have their own reserves, actually. Like, India has its own reserve, which is built up in Mangalore, where they can store, almost like 10 to 15 days of crude oil consumption, even if there is no 1 barrel of crude oil gets imported into the country, you can actually draw down from that reserve in Mangalore and can be actually used by the the refineries located across the country to produce petrol and diesel to continue to supply that actually. So our reserves, having said that, are much lesser than the kind of reserves that either the China holds or the US holds actually. So they are very large reserves, typically ranging between 2 months to 3 months actually, right? So even if the oil supply gets disrupted from 2 months to 3 months, I don't have any problem. I have my reserves, I can draw upon my reserves actually. So if you have any disruptions in supplies, reserves are one of the weapons that you can deploy to beat that war that is coming up in the market due to disruption in supplies actually, right? Disruption on the one end, affects an entire downstream actually. Look at crude oil gets disrupted, right? When crude oil gets disrupted, the entire value chain gets disrupted. Like you are not able to put, petrol into your vehicle. You're not able to travel to your office, and because you're not able to travel to your office marks you leave, and because it is an unannounced leave, they start deducting your salary. So there is a huge effect on the downstream. On the other hand, because the crude prices go up and the plastic prices go up, the container prices go up, and hence the commodity price in which the container is holding that particular commodity, it also goes up actually. So there is a huge downstream effect of any one commodity price, has an impact on the entire downstream actually. The producer consumer divide, the divide also defines the vulnerability profiles actually. Like say for example, copper. Let's take the same example of copper. Copper is typically concentrated in the countries like Chile and Argentina and these South American countries actually, and the consumption is spread across the various countries actually. So any single event that is happening in any of these countries which are located in South America would have a long range ripple effect on the countries, and it is also depending upon vulnerability profiles actually. What is the kind of resource that these countries hold actually? So it's more important. Countries like India, as it grows, it should look to build up reserves. It should look to build up warehousing capacities which can make reserves pretty much transparent. And this is where the WTRA came into picture. This is where WTRA had expanded its scope from agriculture to metal commodities. And we'll see how government empowers the warehouse development and regulatory authority so that there is some sort of an activity which goes on with it actually. And then typically oil is produced in Middle East and then shipped across the Asia, and it lights the home, right? And so and it lights or it actually enables us to travel from office to home or whatever it is actually. So there is a typical concentration of the commodity supplies, such as that happens in the case of oil actually. And Europe, as I said, Europe was, you won't believe, 80 to 90% dependent on Russian gas. And all of that, they were consuming gas basically because they wanted to become as much green as possible. They were like afraid of emissions. And so they were too much dependent on gas to such an extent that, like, most of their power production happens out of gas, not much out of coal. And even if they would want to shift it to coal, it's a long drawn process, and they can't do it because they have a commitment to greening the European Union. And so that's also something, where, it's actually not the need, actually, it is the geography of the power, right? So Russia, if it actually switches off the gas pipeline, and imagine what would happen to the power prices or electricity prices, maybe in Spain, maybe in France, maybe in UK, it'll shoot up like 30 to 40% actually. So Europe's dependence on Russian gas is actually another vulnerability that Europe has, towards what its energy prices are actually. And so our own oil dependency, we are like 80%, 85% dependent on imported oil, and most of this imported oil is coming out from the West Asian countries, including the Middle East, actually, right? So, having said that, conflicts like the Red Sea conflict would definitely have an impact on, right, on what the prices at which it is being received by the Indian refineries, actually. And that's one of the reasons why we've not been able to revise the prices downwards for a long period in time. And oil prices have been on the boil. Not only oil prices have been on the boil, the cost to ship that oil has also been on the boil, actually. So as a result, the prices have gone up, actually, right? So, in short, you have to keep the supply chain alive. Actually, not only that, you have to keep the production of commodity alive, you also have to keep the supply chain alive, actually, right? In a globalized world, the most valuable thing during a crisis is not oil or gas, but it is a supply chain, right? And that supply chain ensures that there is a certainty with which the commodity will reach the consumer, so that the trust is not broken, and that broken trust could ripple through across warehouses and wallets, actually, right? So, and we've seen this, in the case of Red Sea, and where I can give you an example where the insurance cost went up by 10x times. Actually, we can see that in case of disruptions which echoed across the map when Red Sea disruption happened. So delay in one node leads to pain and across all the downstream. So, for example, the textiles would have to reach China, and China would have to make ready-mades and then ship it out to US. So one delay in one side would lead to a kind of delay across the supply chain. Actually, it raises the freight costs, squeezes the inventory. The fear of price rise increase, it slows the delivery, actually. So the markets trust prices apart from supply and demand. Market trust prices or trust the supply lane, supply stability, supply chain stability apart from the supply and demand as a force in itself, actually. So that's very important for us to understand, actually. So we need to have a very resilient supply chain, actually. For example, every missile attack that may happen in the Middle East would have an echo on the trading screens, where the oil is getting traded, because it's a major producer and supplier of oil, actually, right? And Brent oil war premium went up as much as $10 per barrel on overnight on one of the days because of the Ukraine invasion and the Russian ban that was happening, actually, right? And the gold's emotional surge, actually. So the gold, apart from the COVID, actually gold also jumped up from not the $300, $3,000 per ounce, actually, in response to the global instability, actually. So whenever there is a global instability, gold's emotional demand, or the demand of those people who fear the instability, pushes their investment towards gold. And so as a result, the gold prices, always shoot up, actually. And we saw that, right, in European economy when the Ukraine conflict started. the gas prices spiked almost like 700%. I think for few hours or in a day or something like that, major cities in Europe had a problem in terms of power disruptions because they couldn't supply the prices at the committed prices actually. So always mind it, fear has a price and market would have to pay it, if not today, sometimes even in advance, because there are futures contracts which are trading them, which are actually instilling those fears in their price discovery actually. So it's very important for us to understand actually. And then, we know that Russia is supplying 11% of world's oil, and we know that initially the world started stopping the gas, the oil supplies, but later on they said we will put a cap on Russian supplies at around $70 per barrel, and anything which is supplied above $70 per barrel would have to actually attract a higher tariff or whatever it is, and that tariff will be actually collected by the nation which is importing it and submitted over to the country. So this is where, the entire 11% of supplies, the world wanted to kept it out of the supply chain, thanks to China and India finding out innovative ways of importing Russian, oil without disrupting the dollar payments, which may have to happen through SWIFT, which is paying yuan and paying rupee. We got our oil and we got sometimes LNG as well, and as a result, we were able to survive that price onslaught that happened in the crude oil markets actually, right? So that is another thing, right? So India could buy discounted Russian crude, and that led to huge savings in foreign exchange reserves, which is dollars. We don't need to pay in dollars, we need to pay in rupees actually, right? So we don't need to lose those dollars actually. So that led to forex reserves remaining more safe in the last 1 year or so actually. So now we are back into the market, and Russia also have learned the game of how to get the dollar back again and things like that. And maybe soon America may announce that we will announce Russia to import the dollar priced crude oil into the markets and things like that actually. So that's another thing which would happen actually. Price. So we saw that, right? Fertilizer prices, diesel prices hit the multi-year highs when the crude oil prices went up. So the German prices, gas prices in terms of gas that would be needed to generate a megawatt hour prices, also went up actually, right? Ukraine led to huge food price panic, right? So that also because Ukraine produces major amount of wheat and corn and sunflower oil, which is supported across, which supports consumption in Asia and Africa. So that led to a higher prices for these, from your bread to vegetable oil, everything got impacted at that particular point in time when Ukraine, the Black Sea naval, blockade was happening because Russia didn't allow Ukraine to ship its grains actually, right? And then same is the case with respect to the Gaza. So you can actually go through it. Like say, for example, the Ashkelon terminal through which Israel was getting its many of its oil supplies, that led to a huge anxiety among, Iran proxies actually as to what would be the way in which, the diesel and petrol can be supplied into Gaza, because essential part is you to move, you need energy, and how would you get that energy if that is blocked and bombed, which is your Ashkelon terminal actually. So that literally drove the prices up in that particular region. And price movement is not about anything of a loss of a particular production of a commodity or supply of a commodity, but the looming potential supply being lost, actually, right? It's a fear of a looming potential supply being lost, actually, that leads to a price shoot up in the market. So, in the absence of disruption, tension inflates the pricing mechanisms, actually, right? Red Sea is again is a very important thing, and we've seen that between the red and the green one actually. So it's a very long route basically to supply. Forget about India from Europe to the other countries such as Malaysia or Singapore or Vietnam. I mean, it's a pretty long route, the ships have to take, so that leads to increase in the number of days, that leads to increase in freight costs, insurance costs, actually. And Egypt has lost millions of dollars because nobody was coming through the Suez Canal and they couldn't charge any one of them. And Suez Canal Company is, facing revenue shortage. And Suez Canal Company is a sovereign company which is owned by the Egyptian government actually, and the premiums for many of the commodities, led to a very high increase actually. So that's another thing that is, you know, oil tankers, in order to be supplied, needed naval escorts, and naval escorts, need cost to be paid back in advance so that you can get the naval escort to, ship it through the Red Sea, actually, right? And commodity routes became typical conflict zones, right? So it's a big problem actually. Freights doubled, insurance spiked 10 times actually, and oil and LNG, picked up initially by about $1 and $3, more per barrel. And oil price, the gas prices went up like, something like $3 to $4 per MMBTU, million metric British thermal units actually. And if you look at it, the Ukraine conflict led to a shortage of edible oil supplies in the world that led to an edible oil inflation, coming into, especially in the case of India, because we are dependent on edible oil imports actually. So your price today is not the product's price and the logistics cost. Your price also includes the price that you have to pay for the fear that the market has because of the geopolitics, and pay for the delay in freight that you have to wait for and get that at a later point in time. That leads to increase in the freight cost, increase in the insurance cost. That leads to your price actually. Product plus logistics plus fear and delay. That's the new equation that you have to look at when you look at the, this one, the price rises during the crisis actually. So these are some instances of price rises. It's not geopolitical events were very recent. They were there as old as 1973. The same Israel went into a conflict with the Gaza that led to the Arab oil embargo, and that led to a huge, shoot up in prices of crude oil. And then, to 1990 Gulf War again led to the crude oil prices going up again. And then 2010, actually, China came up with a rare earth embargo. So the rare earth metals have to be, supplied so that you can produce the high-end magnets which are used in aviation, defense, and renewable energy production and things like that. So you need rare earths actually. So, and if you don't have that, then that's again a bigger challenge actually. And 2019, right, when the Aramco had a drone attack from Yemen actually, so that led to some oil supplies going gaga, on the Saudi side actually. So that led to a higher price rise. So geopolitical conflict has a cost, and we need to pay for that actually. So that is the thing that is very important actually. And China's rare earth actually. China is a pretty large producer of rare earths actually, and this rare earth is used in many of the defense and renewable energy applications actually. And 97%, like according to this picture, 97% of the rare earths are actually produced, manufactured, and supplied by are traded by China actually. So one diplomatic dispute led to supply getting halted, prices getting tripled and quadrupled actually, commodities got. So the point that I just wanted to say that the security that you have to have is not in your physical land, but also in the atomic numbers actually. Different rare earth minerals that you have a secured supply is also very important, and these could be used as weapons by the countries, when there is a conflict in the market actually. And with respect to especially India and its importance to the commodity price risks, oil again, because 85% of our imports, comes consumption comes via oil import, and we are exposed to global oil shock actually. And so when Ukraine, wheat supplies got disrupted, actually, world needed wheat, and India was actually not sure how much wheat it was having in the storage. And all of a sudden, when wheat exports started shooting up in response, actually, India had to respond by saying that, hey, you cannot export wheat anymore because our prices are going up actually. So that needs a very open and a very scientific storage and a transparent mechanism by which those storages are shared between the stakeholders is very important actually. So the policy is now the inflation management policy and the oil tracking, the price tracking policies would have to be much more globalized. For example, India needs to have a very larger oil storage, oil tanks. India needs to have, because if it has aspirations to become an gas-based economy to the extent of about 25% of energy. And if it has aspirations, it has to build up oil storages, gas storages, actually. So that's more important. We not only should be aware about these risks, we also have to put up mechanisms through which we can tackle those risks, actually. So that's very important. That's how you would adapt to a risky future, actually, right? You have to build reserves, you have to build buffer stocks, actually, right? And you have to diversify energy and supply chains. If you cannot buy from US, Europe started buying it from Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, and they were the last supplier for us. Actually, we can't go back to them because they have committed their supplies over to those countries. Actually, so we need to have a diversified supply chains actually through which we can get that actually, right? The important part is resilience is the new name of the commodity strategy. So that's the final point that I would want to leave in that particular slide actually. Traders not only monitor the Fed rate decisions or employment numbers or economic growth numbers, they also now monitor war risks actually. Political events create opportunity, panic, and premiums as well actually. And we need derivatives, a strong derivative market, which would help us to hedge not just the price risk, but also the geopolitical risks, because these are like already factored into the markets. Actually, AI tools forecast volatility using conflict probability indexes. Funds shift capital based on regional political stability, futures volume spikes around the election, military build-up periods, and things like that, actually. So that basically says markets are afraid about what's happening whenever there is a geopolitical conflict, actually. Our trader in the market today cannot only be a forecaster of the price or a technical analyzer of the price. We also would have to be a strategist. If there is a border tension, how would that impact commodities and their supplies? He has to have a very clear picture, actually. So that's how we can survive for a period in time. Finally, as a market professional, actually, every crisis, every geopolitical crisis is both a challenge and also makes us learn a lesson out of that, actually. We need to have global awareness that builds better trading strategies and instincts, and that also helps the policymakers have a better policy foresight, better policy instruments which could tackle those price risks actually. And the best way that you can do it is by learning it from the past and reading from the present what is happening, and forecast the risk which is going to happen at a later point in time actually, right? So that's very important for you too. So thank you for your patient listening. I hope you would have put in your questions on the the you would have put your questions on the chat panel. Let me go through that actually. Um, Abhijit Wadkar. So I'm not able to get what is the question that you put in. Okay, I'll see. Can we get this presentation? Okay, obviously I'll share that with the team. You can actually take that from the team, obviously. And Thank you, Ajay Pal, for your comments. Oh, Omkar, I'm sorry. I didn't see your request for a Hindi. But anyway, आप थोड़ा तो समझे होंगे, but जो भी है, I think you can go through the video which can be posted by them. Okay. So Sahil Mathwani has posed a question. So why didn't they prefer air transport to save transit time? Sahil, I mean, air transport, the cost of air transportation is almost like 10 times the cost of ship transportation, actually. So typically in commodities like, which are bulk commodities, nobody does air transportation. And so that is why you can't do it, actually. So air transportation could not be resorted to. Can you kindly show the Dr. Prabhu? I'm sorry. I think you can go through the video that they may post it so that you can see the slide. Stop the video and what is the most important metric to understand the importance of commodities during crisis and how to mitigate it? Price is the most important. Harsh, price is the most important metric in order to understand the importance of commodities, number one. And number two, import concentration. Import concentration of the commodities in the national portfolio is a very important thing. If you are looking at from a national perspective, if you are looking at from a corporate perspective, how much is the corporate dependent on imported raw materials, or how much is the corporate's output is dependent on exports, because both the imports and exports gets disrupted, and hence their competitiveness gets disrupted, actually. So the import concentration or the export concentration in their output is very important. How do stocks for long investment? I'm not getting, because I couldn't get that question. Stocks for long-term investment, actually. And this is not about stocks. This is about commodities, actually. For a long term, I mean, nations should have a solid policies to wither these geopolitical risks, such as the in India-Pakistan tensions, which can be withered through if we have a solid resource, actually. Yeah. Is copper demand going to shoot up, Gaurav? I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to predict the copper demand. Obviously, see, I mean, one is the Trump imposed tariff, which would have already been factored into the copper prices. And the other one is, I don't see any disruption in copper supply chain, which can actually lead to a copper demand shooting up very high, actually, except for if there is a reduction in the stocks. Because how to choose stocks for long-term investment, I can't say that because I'm not a stock market person. Um, as showed in commodity news nowadays. Why war impact resulting into higher commodity prices? Actually, war impacts because you cannot supply wheat from Ukraine, and you cannot supply crude oil from Russia. You cannot supply nickel from Russia. You cannot supply aluminum from Russia. And they typically constitute between 5 to 10% and 15% of the total supplies. When 15% of the total supplies, get stopped in the global market, fear is the next reason why they are, why the prices are going up, actually. As we seen, Mayur, as we seen that global condition affect gold price. So it always depends on global condition or demand and supply. No, it's the global uncertainty. What fuels the gold prices is the uncertainty in the global economy. That is very important, actually, as towards the demand and supply. I think Yeah. So my only 2 cents worth of a suggestion to all of you, if you are a stock analyst and if you are attending this particular session, please do take care of those stocks. How much is the exposure that they have got? One, to the commodities, to the imported commodities, more importantly, and three, the price volatility of the commodities. And because geopolitical uncertainty increases the price volatility. More than the price increase, price volatility, leads to higher prices for the corporates actually. So you need to be more aware about that. Is it, Sujata, is it better if we use country's currency for foreign exchange purposes while doing export? No, you can't do it basically because we can import all the oil. They will get all the rupee. What would they do with their rupee, right? They have to either invest in India or they would have to use the rupee to buy, let us say, a ship from South Korea or some textiles from Europe actually. They can't do that, right? So that is where there is still a limitation in respect of using our own currency to buy. But we did it to a limited extent, and so we were able to tide through the volatility in the oil market. That's what. But you can't do it over a period in time because they can't do with more of rupee. Because when a country has a trade surplus, Russia has a trade surplus. Russia is exporting more value than what it is importing from India. So they will be left with more rupee. They can't do anything with rupee, right? And at the same time, they can't even hold it in a fixed deposit in India actually, because that's in a Vostro account in a Bank of Baroda branch in a which is being held by a Russian bank on behalf of them actually. So you can't do a fixed deposit actually. So you will be exposed to the inflation, you'll be exposed to the dollar rupee movements and everything. So that is where what Russia did is also some kind of a sacrifice that I am willing to take that risk. But if you want my oil, you take my oil. I'm willing to take your rupee, which is a great sacrifice that I would say that Russia did for us. Can we say green bonds and commodities inversely related? Yeah, depending upon how that commodity is grown, how sensitive that commodity is, or the production of that commodity is to the pollution or emissions. Actually, yeah, to that extent you can. In India, agriculture commodity index growth, how would be? No, I'm not supposed to predict it. Agriculture commodity prices, do go up and go down depending upon what the supplies are actually. So do we maintain strategic reserves for our critical commodities? A good question. For food commodities, rice and wheat, we do have stocks, which is maintained by the Food Corporation of India, Central Warehousing Corporation, and the state warehousing corporations actually. And apart from rice and wheat, we only maintain stocks for crude oil. So this is where crude oil is also very, as I told you, just 10 days. We need to increase our crude oil storages, wherein even if the crude oil supplies stop, we should have supplies of about 3 months of supplies, 3 months of demand, so that we can actually continue to have our oil supplies being met with. What steps the current government of India has taken or needs to take to overcome the scarcity? Storage, making open more storages available, making a very strong derivative market, are the need of the hour to actually look at how the price, the fear is impacting the commodity supplies, and the supply is impacting commodity prices, and the commodity prices are impacting the economy. So from that perspective, storage, transparency, strong markets is the need of the hour actually, right? During geopolitical events, to invest in commodities become profitable, but is most commodity name profitable? No, I would not say. When there is a geopolitical conflict, it leads to uncertainty. Uncertainty when there is, people rush towards gold. So every other commodity has its own fundamentals, so they won't behave in the same way that they may have behaved in one geopolitical conflict vis-a-vis the other geopolitical conflict, actually. Is the USA getting any such benefit while we are using dollar for international transaction? US, so you use dollars to the extent that you use dollars. I mean, it's actually held in the dollar account, and to some extent that leads to some benefit for the US actually, and to the extent that you push it to US, you push the dollars back to the US actually, so there is a friction, and that friction is a typical benefit for the USA because you have to use dollars actually. So obviously, they are floating dollars not for the charity stake. They are floating dollars for you to use it and pay them the rent. And there are various ways in which this rent is paid back. I mean, that needs an entire lecture to tell you, but I tell you there is a benefit for the US because of this actually. Is any carrier opportunity in agri commodity index in India? Devendran, I'm not sure what you are meaning by. If you want to construct an index, obviously you can join one of the exchanges and you know how to construct it, you can do that. And if you know how to trade it, when it gets traded, you can actually trade that as well. You can become a trader as well, actually. What are some ways countries can make themselves more resilient to price or supply chain fluctuations, etc.? The only way is by way of building up reserves, right? And building up self-sufficiency. That's the most important thing, actually. So there is different tariff rate on different country. Expect, yeah, there will be different tariff rate on different countries, depending upon whether the country is a well-developed country, whether the country is a developing country, whether the country faces, the immature industries actually, and so they want to protect those infant industries actually. So depending on that, the tariff levels do go and check. Okay, so I think, I mean, with that, sorry, I mean, you have many questions. I have to skip it. But so one thing, I mean, Neeraj, I wanted why not silver for safe buying instead of gold? I mean, typically market believes gold, but silver also follows gold because there is a silver gold ratio that is typically also traded in the markets, and to some extent, silver also reacts to uncertainty, but most reaction would come out of gold. Thank you for your overwhelming questions, actually. So let me, close it. And thanks NASM for this opportunity. And I hope it was useful. And I'll share the PPT with the NASM so that you can take it. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Paul.